Welcome to the Node.js Community Benchmarking meeting for November 20th, 2017. So far, we have in attendance myself, Michael Dawson, Gareth Ellis, Udam Power, Anil Kumar, Hitesh Kanwathirtha, which I'm sure I just got wrong, Jimmy Thompson, and I think that's it. In terms of our agenda, we have our standard agenda. I don't know if anybody has any items to add to the agenda before we get started. I'll take that as a no then. In terms of announcements, I guess the only thing I'd give people a heads up on is that we have got the web tooling benchmark up. Still a few tweaks to be made likely, but it's up and running if you go to benchmarking.nodejs.org. Probably be a couple things like 4.x it may not run on, so that may be removed, and the units are such that like decimals get truncated, so that will quite likely get multiplied so that decimals are not an issue. But just a heads up that that's there, which is good. Anybody else have any other announcements?
Michael, are we going to talk about Ghost.js?
Well, the next thing on the agenda is to go through the things that are tagged with the agenda items. And 159 is the first one, which is add Ghost.js workload. Okay. So I think the answer is yes, based on that. Okay, if there's no other announcements, then let's move on to that. So the first issue is 159, which is add Ghost.js workload to benchmarking. So I'm guessing, Udam, that was it you asking about that one, or
that's Satvik. He's also
Satvik was asking about that. Okay, so I see that yeah, you've been doing a bunch of work on that front. You want to bring us up to speed and frame the discussion?
Yeah, I put forward a proposal of what I was going to add to the node benchmarking system. So basically, I wanted to, so people or anyone can download the benchmark and use it. So I had developed the benchmark using the early version of Ghost, which was 0.11. And so that it would scale well, I had used MySQL as the default database, overriding the default option of MySQL Lite. You had asked me what license it is under, so it is under MIT license, and
okay.
I had suggested that we move it into a Node Foundation repository.
Right, like is it possible to move it under even the benchmarking directory, like a directory under there or something like that?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. So do you want it under a directory or under the Node Foundation repo?
I guess that one, so your repo is a clone of the original, right?
Yeah, I did make some changes to it so it would run on Node 8 and the latest master of Node as well.
Right. Okay. So it's a clone of the original plus, yeah, right, some changes that you needed to make it run. I guess I was thinking just underneath the benchmarking repo to avoid another repo under the the Node.js org. And unless there's like a reason that doesn't work, that would kind of be my first suggestion.
Okay. So how should I go about making that repository under the foundation org?
Right. So there's well basically there's already a repo called Node.js Benchmarking, right?
Yeah.
If you just then put a PR, because it's just a set of files that you need, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So if under benchmarks, now actually that's probably not. To be consistent, it should, sorry, I'm just navigating. Like actually, let me share my screen here because that's probably better. Sorry, just finding the right one. This one, I think. Right, like I think we have, unfortunately the name's not perfect, but it's under experimental. So like, I think if you just added in a directory under this, under benchmarking experimental benchmarks, and in there you had a subdirectory which was the clone of the fork of the original, or the files from the fork of the original, and then at the top level, the shell script that we need to run it, that would probably be the most consistent with the others and wouldn't add like another different repo to underneath the top level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah.
Mike,
go ahead.
Do you expect to have the actual benchmark code here? No, and not like how we do with the Git clone from other.
The only reason, like, so I think it's fine if we're cloning directly from the external repo, but in this case, Setville couldn't use the external repo directly.
Right. So what would be the process just to standardize? Because the version we have, or the Satvik has, is very old. They have already moved past 1.0, the actual Ghost workload or the application. So do we want to use the old one at all? Do you want to, what would you propose? That would be maybe just a logical question to ponder. Because you don't want to migrate and see different numbers. It will change the baseline. It will change everything else.
Right. So Satville, what do you have any thoughts on that front? Like, do you think it makes sense to start with the earlier version, or does it make sense to try and get the newer one working first, or what were you thinking?
Well, I did some benchmarking with the new version, and there is an open issue on Ghost.js. So it tries to ping the casper.ghost.org website at the background image and also the size of the Ghost logo, and it randomly times out in between requests.
Okay, so the latest one, the newer one, just isn't working.
Yeah, so there are some issues, and one other issue is that when running in the cluster mode, the request returned, there is a length exception on most of them, as in the number of bytes expected don't match the number of bytes in the HTML page.
Right. So it's, I mean, I guess if it's not ready to use the later one, then using the earlier one makes sense, right?
Yeah. For the sake of benchmarking, I don't think it should matter that much.
Okay.
But am I right that if it did just work out of the box, then all we'd need is some sort of wrapper to be able to drive some sort of workload and get some numbers back out of it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is the Ghost team open to pull requests to get Ghost the latest version of Ghost working on the latest version of Node?
Yeah, that would be an ideal goal.
Yeah, I mean, has any contact been made with the Ghost team to see if they're open to that sort of stuff?
To find a workaround for that issue.
Yeah, obviously, because you could spend, obviously you've already invested some time and have a good understanding of how Ghost works at the moment. But we could potentially find ourselves a little bit down the road of Ghost either stopping working because of some other change, and then it would be keep patching an old version of Ghost to get it working on the latest version of Node. Whereas if it's already working, there could be other volunteers who may be willing to, as things are checked into Ghost, for it to go and be made to make sure it's working on the latest versions of Node.
Is the idea then, just to budge in, that we would be benchmarking the latest version of Ghost as of whenever you run the benchmark, or that we would pick a particular version that is currently the latest and then check out that hash as part of the benchmark and use that, and then later on update again at a time that it makes sense?
Well, I think what would be best is to try and stick it a version of Node for a version of Ghost for some period of time, because otherwise we lose all of the sort of history to give us
Yeah, exactly. That is the thing I was thinking about. So the new version of Ghost runs about 20% slower than the earlier version of Ghost for the same version of Node.
But
So in between, say, 3 months down the line, if we switch, all the data would get skewed because we lose all the history.
Yeah,
So,
but I mean, at the same time, if you're going to go and, I mean, presumably the reason why we're considering using Ghost is because we see that as a representative workload, and so therefore, if somebody's picking up Ghost and saying, "Oh, how does this work on the latest version of Node?" and they say it runs 20% slower, that's going to be an issue that sort of the wider community see, and potentially if we've got a load of charts, we seem to have these performance issues, then both Node and Ghost can work together to work out, is it something that's changed in Ghost or is it something that's changed in Node to slow things down?
I think we're going to have the challenge of upgrading ongoing, right? Like at some point for any one of these benchmarks, it's going to make sense to update. And the approach that comes to my mind is that, maybe we run them both, two different versions of it concurrently for a while until you've built up some history, and then you drop off the old one once you no longer, you're comfortable, you've got enough history with the new one.
Yep.
The key thing I think here is like, is it worth getting the version of Ghost that Satvik has working now in, and then maybe 6 months from now update? And I like the idea of if you can go back and work with them to get a newer version working on the later Node.js would make sense. But I guess the question is, at this point, do we wait, or let's get an older version going and start capturing some data and having some coverage there?
Satvik can talk more about this, but I remember the one of the suggestion Ghost teams had said to move to the latest one, and also there was a workaround for the issue what Satvik described. Isn't that right, Satvik? The timeout issue.
yeah. So the workaround was basically to delete all those images from the landing page, but even after that, it still randomly pings that URL, and I or someone from the Ghost team would have to figure out why that is happening. So even though there is no real image, it tries to ping the server to get the size of the image.
Okay, so then it needs a fix anyway. And what was the recommendation? I remember you asking them that question.
Yeah, the recommendation was to delete the images from the landing page. Yeah.
The version of Ghost. Which version of Ghost.js we should use for the benchmarking?
Well, the recommendation would always be to go with the version that's been LTS, which is version 1.0. Yeah. But I like the idea which Garrett suggested, which is to have both of them, so we have history on both of them.
Yeah, like so you did it with 1.0, which is the LTS version?
Yeah, so the one which is hosted on my website currently, it runs correctly with 0.11.
Okay, 0.11. Okay.
So I can update that with the 1.0 version, and we can have both of them run.
Okay. The other thought I had while we were talking is, instead of cloning the whole repo, what might be nice to have under the this directory here in benchmark experiment benchmarks is just a patch that you can apply to the, check out a particular hash from the original repo and then apply the patch that you need to make the changes. Is that something that's workable?
From the I tried doing that before, but my attempts have been mostly a failed one. The thing is, when you check out from the Git, you get sort of different source code than downloading just the zip files which they release for every version of Ghost. So what they actually do when you check out from the repo is they download all the test cases and all the test harnesses, and they also build the JavaScript files using Grunt.
Okay.
And that doesn't just work out of the box every time. It just Yeah, so it needs some user intervention each time.
But similarly, then maybe if you put the zip, which comes under, it sounds like the zip is under MIT license, so you could take that and put that in that directory, and then it would be an unzip that zip. So you say, okay, I started from this known thing, and then apply a patch that you have to make your changes, and that way it's really clear what was the original, what you changed. And if we move to a new version, you can look at the patch and say, well, do we have to make the same changes and so forth? Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. But I have created the blog pages using their user interface. And I know I have some idea of how the content of the blog is stored. Some of it is in the database. Some of it is in the content directory. Those need to be applied in the patch too.
Right. Okay.
I can try and see how that works out.
Okay. Yeah, because I think at least in my mind, that would be the ideal where you have the zip, you know what that is, and then the things that you added in were separate, a separate patch or separate files that even if they're files that you need to like copy in or something like that, that would make it easy, maybe even easier to move up to new versions and stuff too.
Yeah, another thing is when they moved from 0.11 to 1.0, a lot of things changed. So they are not doing database migration at all.
Right. Okay.
So they basically wrote a kind of package, an app in Node.js that runs inside Ghost to move the blocks from one to another.
Right. Okay.
There were all these issues.
Right. So I think if from the discussion, if we ended up with another directory in here that was like ghost 0.1 or .11 and then a ghost 1.0, each of which had the zip that you can download plus whatever other files you need to add, and then a script file that takes those and sort of builds the tree that you need to run and then starts the run. That that would be what we could then easily add in to do run nightly and capture the results.
Yeah, I can see if it is actually possible to apply those blocks as patches.
Okay. So yeah, if you can do that, and if it does, then just submit a PR that we can take a look at and land there as a first step to getting it in.
Yeah, that sounds good. And does that machine have MySQL installed as well?
I don't think basically everything is intended to be, so MySQL is, that's a little bit more of a challenge. We don't have a database running for use that wouldn't be interfered with anything else. Is it something that your script can install, run, and then remove?
What Linux distro is that machine?
It's on Ubuntu.
Oh, I'm not sure, because on Debian-based systems you can do apt install and apt remove.
Right. We don't want to do apt. I guess I was hoping we want to avoid things that do like installs that will affect the state of the machine.
I get it.
But it's, I guess MySQL is not that easy to just install separately, is it?
It's not as simple as MongoDB. That's what you mean.
Right, because that's what we've done with MongoDB. It's basically a.
So it's a binary of MongoDB running as a server?
I think that's
MongoDB setup.
Yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, and it doesn't run all the time. So you, as part of your run, you just start the MongoDB run your workload, and you stop the MongoDB.
Yeah. And it's pinned to a certain set of CPUs so that it doesn't interfere with the, the actual client or the server. Each of them are pinned to different CPUs.
You can do that with MySQL too, but I don't know if it is possible to use MySQL as a binary. So
maybe that's something to do a bit of research on.
Yeah, I mean, so I can send you the. Go ahead, Dr.
So it's easy to install the MySQL, maybe, but if you can convert it into some kind of service, say start the service, run your workload, and stop the service. But then make sure it doesn't start at the boot time, something like that. If that can be done, then we can use that, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's we need to get back to that, the work on the Ansible side, so that if the machine dies, we know what to reinstall as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it would be nice to be able to run on, well, we run on the same machine because sort of we get consistent results. So I guess it's not as important, but we really try to be not tied down to a particular machine.
I mean, you could probably just experiment downloading a MySQL binary, and
Let's see.
And when you start the MySQL start script, you'll have to specify the path to this binary.
I'm just going to see MySQL. I see here's something, anyway. This is a discussion on how to do it on Windows. So hopefully that could be done on Linux too.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you could do it on Windows, I'd be willing to bet you can do it on Linux. Because I think that's what we'd want to do. So on Linux, let's see.
Well, if the application is installed, once you stop the service, it will not interfere with anything that's going on in the machine.
Yes, but it's more about not having to depend on pre-configuration of the machine. Ideally, you should be able to just check out the repo, run the script, and you could do it on, so for example, if there's a problem and somebody wants to investigate the problem, they can more easily just check it out, run it, and get the same results. Not these same results because it'd be a different machine, but
yeah.
So any way that we can do that, it's
then
better.
You could need I mean, MySQL is heavily dependent upon the ini file settings, so your performance will be very different based upon the settings in the ini file.
Right. So the performance might be different, but at least you could, from run to run, it should be consistent on your machine, right?
Yeah, it will be.
So at least, like, if there's an equivalent to that one on Windows where you can grab a zip, unzip the zip, and then, start it up that way, that would be the other thing where, as long as the license is compatible, we could store the zip in that same directory, and then the master shell script could do all the work to sort of extract it, do all the right steps, all the right setup, run the job, and then do all the cleanup.
Is that the way it's done with the MongoDB use as well right now?
MongoDB, the binaries are already unzipped somewhere, but otherwise, yes.
Is it worth considering something like Docker for this? So you can say, maybe we don't include the MySQL binaries in the repo, but you include a Docker file that refers to them. And so that just goes and fetches a particular image, which has a particular version in there. Maybe it's one that has been authored specifically for this, that has the ini file set up however is appropriate.
Yeah, I think Docker, I'm not I'm just trying to think if Docker adds any other issues to performance or whatever, but probably not, as long as we only run the one Docker image at a time.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, if you can go and pin your Docker container to a set of CPUs, there shouldn't really be a big impact on anything else on the system.
The one thing we
say MySQL on its own. The question is whether it introduces any variability to the run. So perhaps it's something to have a quick go at.
Right. And I guess this one that I just pasted the link into actually, I think, suggests running it in Docker. Because I think if we installed just Docker into that benchmarking machine and then we used it where things needed to be installed, that would probably be a good way to go.
Okay, so the part of the flow would be first thing, get the Docker image, start the MongoDB, and then start the run, and then stop the run and stop the MongoDB. Not the MongoDB, MySQL from container.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would probably be a good way to go. It sounds like there's already a standard SQL Docker image, so we wouldn't really even need to, do much other than just run that container and then hopefully, I guess we'd have to also figure out how you pin that container itself to a subset of the CPUs, but that would be a good pattern to have figured out, and then we can reuse in other ones as well, and other people could easily recreate. So.
Yeah, it runs only on a single core, so
okay,
go that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think we just need to tell Docker like run on this core, which is, for the DCEIS and for Acme Air, we say like run the database on this core, run the client on this other core, run the server on this other one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the other option is to have a MySQL binary, pin that to a different core.
Right. MySQL, So any more discussion we need on that front, or do you have
no
things to go look at now?
Yeah, those were the only things open.
Okay, so you'll basically, the notes I'm going to take is you're going to do some more investigation, and when you have a suggested approach, we'll submit a PR, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you'll have more questions between them, but ultimately you'll get to a PR that says this is what it's going to look like, and we can work on that. Yeah,
that one sounds good.
Okay, that sounds good. So that was 159. Moving on to 136. This is the issue that we opened about user feedback. So I do know that has been discussed over in the community committee. There is a group forming to get user feedback. I don't think there's been any concrete action on getting it out there yet, but I hope that will happen in the next little while. I don't think there's too much else to say about that. Was there anything else people wanted to talk about this week?
Do you have any updates from the NodeCon for you?
On that front, or just in general?
Oh, in general.
Okay, so maybe why don't we finish the agenda items and then we can come back to that, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay, the next one was the status of Node Core benchmarks, which is 127. Right, so this is, there has been some discussion about, I know, Gareth, are you up to speed on the discussion that's going on there?
Yeah, so I forget what his real name is, Refak. Yeah, anyway, yeah. So he added an extra property to the launcher, so you can also specify how many runs you want to do.
Okay.
I mean, that was something I missed out to start with because we thought we were going to use just the standard recommended one. So you just got to make sure that people don't go sort of crazy with
going
and queuing up like 3 days of one particular benchmark or something. I'll go and update the documentation to point that out as well. But otherwise, it seems like there's been a number of runs used or done using the scripts, and there's not been. I've not heard any real complaints. So hopefully that means it's working and it's not just people have given up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't really publicized it too much either.
Okay, I don't know, because there seemed to be like a big influx of people trying stuff, so I wasn't sure if something that had gone out.
We did mention it in the TSC, and I'd let a few people know that, you know, it was pretty much there. What I do think though is we kind of want a short blog or some sort of announcement that says, "Hey, this is now available," you know, to the broader collaborator.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to go and do that, you could write a. I mean, I don't know how much we have to say, you know, beyond. There's already the instructions to say here's how to use it, right?
Yep.
So you could just write a blog that's like, it's either, if you could fit it into a tweet, you could tweet it out and then let us all know and we'll retweet it. And I guess even we got to, beyond that, we got to maybe have an issue in the Node repo that says, hey, here's this new thing you can use.
Okay.
So maybe that's more, I don't know whether tweeting it out is the right thing to do, or maybe it's just an issue in the Node repo saying, you know, here it is, here's the links to the documentation, have at it, right?
Yeah, okay.
So do you want to do that, or?
Yeah, I can do. I'll update the documentation to include these runs for the being able to set the number of runs, and then I'll go and open something.
So I'm just going to take a note. Gareth will open in the Node.js repo, explaining what it is, links to docs, and at Node.js collaborators. Because they're the ones who can actually run it, I think. So put all that instruction and then just add them so all collaborators will get a notification. And we may see even more people using it then.
Okay, great.
Okay, that's good. So that was all the things we had on the agenda. Let's take a quick look at the issues just to see if there's any new issues, and then we can talk about other general stuff. Okay, we could talk about this one. I don't know if anybody has any interest in this. Miles had kind of was making a request that somebody would go off and look at the benchmarks, the micro benchmarks in 6 versus master. So maybe I'm just highlighting this as if anybody's interested to go off and help with that, you know, maybe jump in there. We've been mostly focusing on more system level as opposed to the micro benchmarks, but and I know that I forget the name right now, but one of the guys from Google is looking at maybe finding a smaller subset that we could run. But
yeah, Peter Marshall and
right, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then him and I have been talking with Jimmy, and
okay.
We've made some progress. I think he's looked at the HTTP benchmarks.
Okay.
He sent me emails this morning. I've looked at the URL ones, and then him and I will sync up and try to figure out where to go from there.
Okay. It might be good to open an issue in this repo just so that it stays on our, you know, you can put updates of what you've been doing there, and it's on our
Yep.
not,
okay.
not, if not on the agenda, but at least visible there. Okay, that's good. So
remember, you can use the job as well that we've just spoken about to be able to do some compares. You could just include the latest v6.x tag and the master, and then run that through the core benchmark system in Jenkins to be able to. Obviously, you shouldn't do the entire directory, but if, for example, you say, "Oh, I'm going to do the HTTP ones" or something like that, you can go and drop those in to get some numbers, at least.
Yeah, there's sort of two separate. That means the things that Hitesh mentioned they're working on is finding a subset that we could use in the nightly runs. I think what Miles was asking for was just making sure they're consistent.
Ah, okay, sorry.
But I'm not sure, like, until we have that, I think from our perspective that the micro benchmarks, there's too many of them to know what to do with. So at least for me, I'm more interested in getting things we can run regularly than making those consistent across 2 versions. But if somebody's got time and wants to step up for that, I just wanted to highlight that request. Perf Node.js. This one is interesting in that maybe not directly related to benchmarking per se, but Benedict had mentioned that the flame graph tooling, the perf tool that's used for that, because of the switch to the interpreter, now gives you interpreter information as opposed to what you really want. So basically, there's some discussion on that front to figure out what we should do on that front. But maybe next time if Benedict is here, we can talk. So I think we'll leave that to then, unless anybody else has insight on that.
Michael, what is the perf issue regarding the interpreter? I couldn't actually understand reading the description.
Right. So perf, if you know perf, right, they created a plugin to perf that knew how to understand what was going on in the JITted code.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at these 2 graphs, the main difference is that if you look at the bottom one, it actually tells you I'm running this particular JavaScript thing, like I'm running load module, for example.
Yeah.
In the new version, because in Turbofan, not everything is JITted. You start running an interpreter, and then later on it jits things that are hot. When you're running in the interpreter, it just tells you can see those things. It says like bytecode handler call property. And so it's actually telling you what's going on in the bytecode handler, not what's going in your JavaScript.
Oh, okay.
And it and it's because perf is looking at compiled code, but the compiled code you're running is the interpreter, not the compiled code for a JavaScript function, and therefore it doesn't know what to tell you.
Got it.
So yeah, so that's the issue there.
I don't know if you guys have a solution for this, but in Chakra Core, what we do is we have thunks.
Right.
So there's unique thunks for every function that's there, even if it's using the interpreter.
Yep.
And that's what we jump to first before jumping to the interpreter.
Right. And I expect something, I mean, there was a perf plugin for Java as well, and I suspect something along the same lines was going on. So the question he was having is, do people really care about this? And I guess if yes, then we'll have to figure out whether, it's a fix to perf or if there's some other alternate way to get the data that matters. I think there was some discussion, so leading into the NodeConf EU, there were some discussions with like Netflix, Yunong from Netflix, they're saying that, yeah, well, doing these flame graphs is definitely important and interesting to them. If there was an alternative way to do it, that might be okay. But there was no conclusion in terms of how the right way to do it is going to be.
I mean, it would depend upon in production workloads how much of the code is actually going through Turbofan. But some of the code could just be interpreted the entire time, and you'll kind of not have any visibility into that JavaScript code at all.
Yeah, and like even code that's run for a long time can be de-optimized, in which case it goes back to the interpreter and you still wouldn't see what's going on.
Yeah.
And that may be why you're slow. So that may be even just more important to see that. So yeah, it's it's one of the problems. It's not necessarily, I think it's closer to the diagnostics side of things, but since it was mentioned here, I opened the issue here.
Okay.
Web tooling benchmark we mentioned is going well nicely. And I guess, Udom, I still have to get back to landing your updated PR. I think the problem last time I looked at it need to be rebased. It's possible.
So I already did. It just needs a benchmark ID change because
Right.
took the next bench ID. So I'll do that.
Okay. So yeah, once you do that, I'm hoping it's an easy land. We can get that out of the way.
I have one thing to talk about if there is nothing else. If you're just looking for an issue. Is that okay if I talk about?
Sure. We just need to also make sure to remember to come back to the other question about Node.conf.eu, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I remember, maybe you remember, we talked last time that I'm looking at this use of HTTP2 new API. I did convert Node.js to HTTP2 API using the experimental branch in Express and our latest node.
Yep.
And I see some major performance difference between the HTTPS in version 1 versus HTTP 2. And I'm talking to James and Matteo about those differences. So I don't know whether when would be the good time to add into our benchmarking with a new change. And I'm going to create a recipe so that we can convert maybe Acme Air also to use HTTP2 and some other workloads as we add new ones.
Right. I guess I
So
don't
what
see any problem with adding it now. Like, is it, like, is it, if it was easy to add now, I'd say why not just do it now? Because it'd be good to know that sort of performance from the beginning.
Yeah. The difference is that it won't run. Let's say for Node.js, DCIS, it won't run as how it is running now. The reason being the Python client, it doesn't have the HTTP2 support. So I have to use the Apache Bench tool just to understand whether it works okay and all those
Yep.
things. If that is good enough, just to from the tracking perspective, I can go ahead and create the PR.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why having, like, so you're saying it just needs to use a different client, and will that eventually change, or
Yes.
what's?
Yeah, right now, like RunSpec or the Python client in DCIS does a lot of various URLs and different configuration of the number of records in the database. Since that Python client doesn't work out of box, which is a request module from Python,
Yep.
I have to use AB. That means I can only use one particular URL, which is fine, which does show the problem, that which does show the performance issue.
Okay.
We can start there, I guess. I don't have any hard rule. What are the thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like, it seems to me like the broader HTTP performance is something that having good coverage of, like, yeah, if we had an HTTP2 version of Acme Air and of no DCIS, that would be a good thing that we have running.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start working on that PR then. I already have code ported. I'll create a PR and I'll look into the Acme Air also to see if that can be used.
Okay.
Do you want me to open an issue just so that it's all is there?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sounds good. Lets people see what's going on. Okay, so there's a question about Node.conf.eu. Did you have specific questions or just a general what happened there kind of thing?
Well, my specific questions would be about performance, but if there isn't, then we can.
Right. I don't think there weren't any specific, like, we didn't have a bunch of people get together and talk about, benchmarking or performance side of things. There was a fair amount of discussion on the sort of diagnostic side. So I think there's interest in pushing an effort on that front. Yeah, I think performance-wise, I'm thinking, just trying to think if anything sort of pops up. Yeah, nothing comes to mind as specific things that were discussed there, or even in the presentations or anything. There was one presentation on footprint, like memory footprint for modules, but that's sort of not directly. I guess it is related to some of the benchmarks like memory use that we do. Yeah, no, nothing comes to mind as something I should really highlight on that front.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess that's the end of our agenda for this week. Any other discussions people want to have? If not, I guess we'll talk in 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
December 4th. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. We'll talk to you all then.
Right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you, Mike.
Bye.